And so I knew that I was selling myself, but I didn't really believe that people would buy me, if that makes sense. And so I think that the fact of that happening has made me really confident in a way that I wasn't before.
Fiona Siseman coached at Spotify for 7 years, co-created a career progression framework for coaches at Spotify, and then she walked away to start Frank and Eddie Leadership. Today, we're talking about what it actually takes to go from coaching inside a big brand to building your own practice, and how to find your niche when you're starting from scratch. You became a coach to help people, but no one told you how to build the business behind it. Welcome to Coach as Entrepreneur, the show for coaches building real businesses with systems, strategy, and heart. Fiona, thank you for joining us today. I'm curious, how did you get into coaching? Because nobody wakes up as a 7-year-old saying, I want to be a coach. And how did you go from becoming a coach? How did you get into Spotify and to start coaching there as well?
I didn't wake up saying I want to become a coach, but I did have somebody, a mentor, like a skip level manager, say to me one day, "You're going to make a great agile coach." I was kind of like, "Oh, okay, I guess I'm going to make a great agile coach." This was back in Australia, maybe 20 years ago now. And so I kind of learned coaching on the job in that role back then, which was with Lonely Planet, as they became an agile development, adopted agile processes in their development. And then a little bit later, the thing that I did say at some point to someone is, I just want to get paid to talk to people. That was what I wanted. And in that journey at Lonely Planet, I did become an agile coach, and then someone I worked with had started a business in Melbourne and said, "Would you come and be an agile coach here?" And agile coaching is how would I become an agile coach here? And so I left Lonely Planet and I went and worked for him. I didn't. It was a great opportunity, and I didn't work very much, and I earned a lot of money, and I had a really great lifestyle then. And I was a totally freelancer, so he didn't pay me if we didn't have clients, and that suited me for a little while. But I found it really stressful. And so I didn't want to consult, which is more what this was,
Mhm.
consulting agile coaches in. And I also did want to go overseas. And so at that time, Spotify had been advertising. Spotify was really well known for its agile adoption and the way it did things from 2012. And I had some contacts over here, but I ended up winning a green card, longer story, but winning a green card to the US. And so that was kind of the catalyst to come over. And I came over and I was like, we'll see. My husband and I will see if we can make a go of it there. And I worked somewhere else, freelancing again here for a few months, and didn't love it. But I was going to meetups with some of the coaches from Spotify. And eventually, one of the coaches that came to that meetup spoke to a friend of mine back in Australia because they were connected, an ex-colleague of mine, and said, "Do you know any coaches in that would want to work at Spotify in New York?" And he was like, Fiona, who you're meeting with every week in that meetup, would probably be a great choice. And I kind of had in my mind, like, Spotify is a bit of a cult. Like, I think a lot of the agile coaches were like that. It cannot be
Mhm.
as good as um the
Yeah,
marketing about it was. So that was what drew me to the interview, and I decided it would be fun, and they decided they would hire me, and there I was.
so you said 2012. So Spotify was already doing coaching internally?
Spotify, yes, they were. So in
Okay.
2012, they published a white paper about coaching at Spotify, or I think they did. A couple of them did a talk in an agile conference in Paris, I
Okay.
think it was, and that kind of went viral with like, "Oh, this is how you do agile," and it was true and not true, but it really generated a lot of interest. And at the time, they were hiring coaches. When I joined in 2016, they had about 60 coaches across
Okay.
the organization. I don't know how big the organization was. It wasn't that big.
Yeah. I mean, Spotify is huge globally. I don't know how many people they have on their team now.
Yeah, it's been 2.5 years since I've been there, so I'm certainly going to muck up the figures. But there was something like 3,000 people when I joined in 2016, and maybe 1,500 of those worked in the engineering side, the
Mhm.
research and development side of the company, as opposed to the more commercial
Right.
sales, other functions, really quickly over the whole time I was there. By the time
Yeah.
I left, there was around 10,000, 9 or 10,000 people. And so part of a job of an agile coach is to help the organization scale more smoothly, I
Yeah.
would say. Having observers of the process and keepers of the how we work, not just what we're building, is really kind of what the coach is focused on. And
Yeah.
so there was a lot of them for a while, and then as the business matured, there were less and less.
I see. And so Spotify had agile coaches in the company, then you kind of got brought in as an agile coach, and then your work kind of it evolved from just agile coaching, though, as I understood, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think agile coaching is seen as like what is the process by which teams on the ground, like of engineers and product managers, like what is the process that they use and how does that scale in the organization? And then different coaches have different ways that they approach that. So some have been engineers before, and so there's a lot of technical processes practices associated with that, and they coach in that way.
Yeah.
And then some like me, I didn't have an engineering background. I just worked a lot with engineering teams and building the digital website for Lonely Planet.
Yeah.
So my interest was much more how do we make sure we're getting the most, we're all working towards the same thing and getting the most input and collaboration between the people that need to collaborate. And it
Hmm.
starts like at that team, agile coaching really like starts at that team level. But as soon as you kind of get that running, you've got to like get the level above needs to be aligned because, you
Yeah.
know, if the engineers manager is saying something and the product manager's manager is saying something and they don't align, like the chaos is happening down lower. And so it
Yeah.
just kind of naturally, I do think naturally as coaches, agile coaches grow, the really competent ones, and Spotify was a very high autonomy, highly agile company as
Hmm.
opposed to maybe a bank that needs to change from the way it used to work to become agile. And so there's a
Yeah.
different flavor of coaching that's needed there. So it, I just want to say that because I think agile coaching at Spotify was a lot about influencing not having a prescribed method that they had to do it, but
Hmm.
continually asking them how what they were doing was achieving what they were aiming to achieve. And is that the right thing? But so it's kind of this continual question and
Yeah.
a lot of influencing and no real mandate to tell people how they should do things.
I would say the last 20 years or so of these new companies, startups, their systems and processes have been so agile instead of being fixated on this is just how we do it because this is our institution. We've done this for 50 to 100 years. We're just going to take this whole new idea of agile, right? Because agile is still like maybe 20 years, something like that,
The
right?
Agile Manifesto, I think, came out in 2001,
Yeah,
if I'm not misquoting. So yeah, that's like 25 years. And I would argue that there were things that were still,
right.
an agile mindset about how you do creative project work.
Yeah. And so the way Spotify was working makes a lot of sense because instead of prescribing everybody to do it one way, it's just here's our end goal. And then how do you make sure because very quickly it can become chaotic in terms of what are you doing, how are you doing it,
Yeah.
why are you doing it? And then if you have like because I've seen it as well where you have engineers and then you have product or marketing people and then everyone says this is what we're doing but everyone interprets it completely differently.
Yeah. Right. And are incentivized in different ways. Like, sales and marketing are incentivized to make the sale or to have this
Mm.
functionality, or that's always competing with, what the tech teams want to do often. And so, I mean, it shouldn't be competing, is the point. It should be
Yeah.
aligned at the top. And as you get bigger and bigger, that gets more and more difficult. I mean, I guess they were one of the first that started to scale that out. I'm not going to say the first, but one of
Hmm.
the first that started to scale that out. And this was happening. You got to remember when this scaling was happening too, because I remember starting at Spotify in 2016 and just going, wait, they're just throwing up, they're having an idea for what to build, and we're spinning up another squad, another team. We're just going to hire people. But that was the vibe back then. There was
Hmm.
money.
Yeah.
Spotify was very willing, which I think was an asset, to just build it and learn and throw it away if it didn't work and
Hmm.
put the people onto something else. Like there was enough going on that they could do that because they had enough money, but it just
Yeah.
added more and more chaos.
Yeah, I mean I can imagine it but at the same time I can't imagine trying to manage it. So for
I
you
mean,
then.
that was not my job either, I'm going to say, managing it. Like, I was in that system. I wasn't managing that system. There was a lot of other stuff that went on around.
Mhm.
There's people are always surprised to know that there are program managers at Spotify because it was so big, and we do need to coordinate across different departments,
Uh-huh.
tribes or studios as they're called now. Yeah, that was an ongoing challenge of trialing, like how do we in this highly autonomous, fast moving, fast growing organization stay aligned. I don't know
Hmm.
if they've nailed it yet. I mean, they've nailed it enough.
Yeah, so they're still moving forward and they're still growing, right?
Yeah.
Uh, So then in your coaching, because so you kind of you went from being very specifically agile coach, right? How would you describe
Yeah.
your evolution as a coach within Spotify and where you are today?
As I said before, the more you improve the teams at the bottom of if you think of the bottom of the stack, the ones closest to the work, which is one of the premises of Agile, they're the ones that know best. How do you then keep it aligned up through the organization? So I spent about 18 months working in the Spotify for Artists app area as they were launching that.
Hmm.
And then that was very driven by what the artists and their labels and the creators and there was what they needed and what they wanted. And there was something there that I didn't work well with me, and I ended up moving into the infrastructure side of things and working on the platform infrastructure teams. And straight away, I did 18 months in that first organization, and then within about a year of moving into the next one, I was starting to like, oh, I can't coach the teams. Like as I said, when I started, there was 60 coaches, and that was because we used to have a coach per two or three teams. But then that slowly began to change. When I started, there was me and probably 15 teams, and I can't coach 15 teams. Like I can't be close enough. So I'm like, there was
Yeah.
a real conscious move to like, oh, okay, I have to coach. And I had peers that I was working with, but I have to coach the leaders of these teams. So
Yeah.
how do I teach them and then facilitate them to do it? So that was kind of the beginning of what's the next level of agile coaching when you're not the one doing the facilitating or
Hmm.
helping them groom a backlog or something. The next, so I don't know, I spent a year or so focusing on that, I would say. And then the next level is like the organization above that, where we've got those 15 teams have ultimately three or six, whatever the constellation is, of leaders at the top who are leading the different functions within those teams. And so how do we align together on what is the cadence for that? And
Yeah.
so whilst I was just called an agile coach the whole time I was there, I was really doing team coaching, leadership coaching, kind of one-on-one coaching. And because a lot of it is interpersonal stuff. Like the
Right.
power hierarchy is preventing me feeling brave enough to bring something up, or there isn't an opportunity to bring that up. And how do I make that? And how do I give people feedback? And so it became a lot of training in those things, but also more. I didn't do a lot of giving of training. Other
Hmm.
coaches did a lot of giving of training. I was always much more. I want to be there in the moment. Guerrilla facilitating, I used to call it. I'd like to be in the room and to ask the pertinent questions that no one else was asking, and
Hmm.
coach leaders around. Yeah, that seemed like a good interaction, but what was going on with that one, and how can we make that better next time?
Yeah. So from working within the system and making sure things were aligned and facilitating the development teams, their plans, right? The interpersonal relationships between the teams and leadership. What exactly does that framework entail, and how does that work? How did you go from that work that you did and that framework and then to leaving Spotify to where you are today?
There were enough coaches. At this point, there was probably 30-ish coaches when we started needing that framework. And the organization was big enough that those coaches were very separated in terms and reported into a whole lot of different people. So in terms of cohesiveness for how do I promote a coach? There were a couple of levels at that time, but the what does it mean to be a senior versus not a senior? Like that wasn't written down or codified anywhere. So Alia and I
Mm,
really, my now business partner, and I took that on to solve the problem of both I as a coach don't know what I should be aiming for to grow, and maybe I report into an engineering leader who doesn't really know what it means to coach. They're not getting necessarily good feedback from the person that we're reporting into, and that person also doesn't have anything to look at that tells them what makes someone an agile coach versus a senior agile coach, for example. So we had these coaches that really wanted to grow, and at the same time we had promotions going on where we were starting to get out of sync, where what I could expect from a senior agile coach in one part of the organization maybe is different to what I could expect in the other part, and that was a bit problematic and
I see.
confusing.
Yeah.
And there had been some efforts to do this work before. We did start from scratch actually, but we had other artifacts to look at. But it was really like, okay, what level of impact do we expect an agile coach to have versus we ended up with four levels. And so it was really these rounds of like talking with these managers and people who did know what good agile coaching looked like and had seen kind of the progression, and just capturing that. And it was a lot about how much of what's going on around this team that I'm working with am I taking into account, and am I coaching on? Am I having a good impact? Am I able to influence? Am
Mm.
I taking the resistance that it comes, the social dynamics that come from leaders who have competing incentives? Like I said before, like there's some friction
Yeah.
there that you've got to be really skilled and brave to wade into, and that more juniors won't.
Yeah.
And so really kind of articulating like the differences in there, so that when coaches were being promoted or wanting to know where they should grow,
Mm.
they could see that. And there's two things I want to add. One is there are agile coach frameworks external to Spotify. There's a few general ones,
Mm.
that again that we did draw on, and that, but in terms of having it customized to like, well, what does it mean at Spotify? It was kind of that interpretation that we were doing. So we weren't wanting to replace some of the more general ones that were out there, but they were often more at these aimed at these coaches who were doing agile transformation work as well, and doing training and implementing processes. So some of them were, not that we didn't ever do that. We certainly did do that in the areas that needed it, but as a holistic function, that wasn't so much what we were there to do.
Okay, so your time at Spotify, agile coaching, kind of moving up, setting up that framework for agile coaches and those different levels. And then you and your current partner were both working at Spotify for those
Yeah,
years. And then you guys both decided to leave together, correct?
sort of correct.
Sort of. Okay, so how did you guys,
Yeah,
well, because you're working together now, or how did you decide to step away from Spotify and then go into this coaching that you're doing now, which is
yeah.
much more leadership, organizational coaching, correct?
Yes. It's probably not directly organizational,
Hmm.
but it is in the way that we are coaching senior leaders and helping them think. Often, sometimes what we're doing is helping them think through organizational stuff.
Okay.
I guess the line I have there is, am I consulting and going in and helping them do the work on the ground? And I think organizational coaching, there's a lot more of going in and being in the organization
I see.
than the two of us do. But yes, we're coaching, directors, founders, really anywhere up to, it's hard to say now. When we first set out, we were like, we can coach people who run organizations of up to 400 people. And I think that probably is still standing now
Hmm.
as what we do, but I don't think we quite define ourselves the same way. But anyway, we had been working together on this framework. We knew we worked well.
Yeah.
I was getting sick of working full time.
Hmm.
I just did not want to anymore. I've done it too long. I'm 10 years older than my business partner.
I see.
So that was the real driver for me. And also at the time, there was not anywhere to go with coaching. A lot of coaches at Spotify that did move to become engineering managers or product managers, and like,
Hmm.
I reported in the organization I was in, my manager was an ex-agile coach and his manager was an ex-agile coach. So
Hmm.
there was definitely like that kind of path. But if what you wanted to do was stay a coach, there wasn't really, even with our framework, like once you hit the top of that, the step into running an organization was a difficult one to
I
make.
see.
You had to kind of step earlier. If I had become an engineering manager, then maybe I would have stayed, and
Hmm.
but I didn't want to. And at the same time, there was a bit of a shift around, like Spotify had grown so big, and that difficulty of keeping things aligned was swinging back away from like being less autonomous teams, less self-organizing teams, and
Hmm.
a bit more. There was more standardization coming down, which I don't think was a bad thing, but it wasn't a thing that gelled well with coaches who want to, help teams. Coaches don't want to be implementing the systems onto teams. They want to be working with teams coming up, and the flavor of that was starting to change. And also different leaders come in and come and go, and there were a lot of, in parts, there were leaders that had different ways of approaching, because if your leader didn't understand what a coach did and what value a coach brought, it was sometimes pretty hard to see it, even with our frameworks.
Yeah. I mean, because there's generally a lot of confusion around, even with like, so just the term coach in the business world, it's like, what kind of coach are you? But even
Yeah.
among like, when you talk about agile and that definition of agile, if everyone assumes their definition, there's probably at least 5 to 10 different variations of that, right? And so
Yeah.
yeah, if you don't start from the same base definition of agile coach, or if it's not aligned, even from that very beginning, you get a lot of misalignment further down the line. And so, and then with
Yeah.
every new leader
Yeah.
comes in, they always have a different strategy and plan in mind, right? And so what you started
Yeah.
6 months ago, when the new leader comes in, is like, no, we don't like that. We're just gonna throw it out and do something else. And so,
Yeah. Yeah. And so actually, Alia had a lot of that going on in her side of the organization. And so that was really burning her out.
mhm,
And so she and I had started, we were quite good friends outside of work already. And at some point we had said, wouldn't it be great if we did this for ourselves one day? I think Alia tells this story as I said we could do it. Alia said we couldn't, could we? And I said, yeah, of course we could. And so then she had to go. She went, I had done like one-on-one coaching training prior to this, and she had not. And so
mhm,
she actually started leaning further into that kind of in preparation. And we started talking about it
mm,
just slowly, like with one day we'll do this. But then Spotify started layoffs the same time all the other big tech companies started layoffs in 2021-ish,
yeah,
or 2022. And she was in one of the first rounds of layoffs. They laid off her organization, laid off all of the agile coaches actually in their organization. And so all of a sudden, she's like, okay, I mean, she was like, okay, I'm going to get another job, or we're going to start with this business now. And so I then had to get up the guts, I'm going to say, but like, actually make the decision to
mhm,
leave. And so I think she was laid off in November, and then I left the following June. So she did a lot of, I'm going to say, waiting for me to leave, but also a lot of the pre-work.
sure,
We had a website built by the time I left, for example, because she had time to do it. So she
mhm,
was doing kind of slow background setup work, and the two of us were meeting with other coaches, and she was finishing started the last segment of her coaching and had some free clients that she needed, as you do the training.
right.
So, she was doing all that stuff and I was working out how to leave.
Okay. So you left, you started working together. So most coaches, they start off as solo coaches, right? They set up their LLC,
Yeah.
there's just them.
Well, I don't know, but yes, I guess so.
In general, yeah, most coaches, they finish their career in whatever corporate world they were in, and then they start coaching. It's them and their families, but with the two of you guys, you had to have more discussions because you both have to be aligned, right? Like, as
Yes.
I would imagine being
Yes.
aligned is very important for both of you as agile coaches. So then, what does the conversation look like for the two of you when you say, "Okay, we're working together. We need to make sure we're making money." And what's our like a 90-day launch plan? What does that
Yeah.
conversation look like?
I mean, very practically, there was a point where we made just a probably Google Doc list of what are all the questions and fears and worries that we have.
Hmm.
And so we kind of got them all down on paper and we were answering them together. So what's my answer to this? What's her answer for that? And a big piece for me is I was the sole earner at the time, and
Hmm.
so when I left, there was no more income into my household. Ali's partner still works for Google, and
Hmm.
so that was different for her. So we had to have that conversation, and
Yeah.
for me, there was a lot of work on getting comfortable with, okay, what will that look like with not having a paycheck and how much is going to be enough? And that was conversations with my husband and kind of sorting that out. And weirdly, we ended up with the same. One of the questions was, what's the minimum we want to make, like in terms of this business is viable?
Yeah.
And we came to the same number by chance each, which I really don't know how happened. But,
I,
and
I,
that was the thing.
I'm curious what the number
Yeah.
was.
It was $75,000. It's not
Okay.
big,
Yeah.
but like, if that will cover, for me, that was like, that will cover living expenses
Right.
and not be eating into savings.
Yeah. So just
Um, and we can afford to do that for 2 years, is what we said. So
okay.
those were two really big things that we had to align together. And I've spoken with other coaches who have considered partnerships and they haven't been able to do that because if one needs a lot more money, because
Mm.
75,000 not that much if you live in New York City,
Yeah.
and it's certainly not much if you've got a family, which neither of us have kids. So that again, we were a match from that perspective. And I've spoken to as I said, people who have kids don't have kids. They can't make that match sometimes. So that was the biggest thing. One of the things that we do with teams, that I mean, we lived the things that we would coach teams to do, we had to do for ourselves. Like we were making a product here, is how we approached it. And so what did we think that would look like? Who did we think we're coaching? We did a lean canvas thing on like who is our customer and why would they buy us and who are the competitors. And I think we were pretty spot on. Spot on. That sounds like we got it all right. It was enough to get us aligned at the beginning and to
Mm-hmm.
know that we were speaking mostly the same language. A year in, we were still discovering things where we didn't quite mean the same thing, but
Mm-hmm.
we did do a lot of the work. So we had conversations of like, oh, what if one of us finds out this is not enough money and needs to do something else? How are we going to handle that? What if, I think we had, what if someone dies? What if what if one of us gets a really good offer from somewhere else and wants to go and work full time or
Mm-hmm.
consult more than coach, and it would be a different thing. So we had a lot of conversations about those, and we wrote them down and we revisit them every quarter. Still, we read through that original operating agreement and
Mm.
talk about what's still relevant and what's not. Oh, and we did values as well. Like, what do we want this company to
Mm.
feel like? And in fact, we didn't have dollars as our guiding aim. So like our main thing, North Star, if you like, was always like, are we having fun? Are we delivering what we want to? And do we want to work with each other? Like we didn't want to get any of those things out of balance.
Mm.
And the money always for me was secondary, actually. And that was partly because, like I said, I was fed up of working for full time and I didn't want to work for other people and I just wanted to do my own thing. And so that was a real
Yeah.
driving piece for me.
So are you guys having fun?
Mostly. I mean, yeah. So what that looks like in practice is if one of us is not enjoying something, we talk about it and we see if we need to rebalance something or if we need to say no
Mm.
to something. We're 2.5 years in now, and I'm finding I still love the one-on-one coaching.
Mm-hmm.
I could do that and only that,
Mm.
and that doesn't earn enough money if we do that,
Yeah.
although we could redefine what enough is, but it's very hard to make a living just from doing that unless you're charging a lot, and we don't want to charge a lot really, because our one of our things is we want to serve mid-level managers and underrepresented managers, and
I
they're
see.
not paying $10,000-$20,000 for a coaching program, so we're not aiming to do that because they probably don't have budget, or they have limited budget, or they're
Mm-hmm.
paying themselves and their salary is lower than the director or VP, who A, but probably gets it provided, and B, could
Yeah.
afford to do it themselves often.
Right.
So yeah, but so we also do facilitation and workshops for leadership teams,
Mm-hmm.
and I love the running of those workshops, but the preparation for those workshops is like that's a friction point for both of us in terms of our working styles. I save things till the last minute, and Alia wants to do things really early and have them all ready and ready to go. And I don't even have my best ideas until the last minute sometimes. So, there's
Mm-hmm.
been a lot of how do we manage that, and we just keep trying different things. I don't know, maybe 6 months in, maybe a year in, we stopped. We said we don't work every second Monday. Like we just don't. We definitely have a 3-day weekend.
Mm-hmm.
We definitely close over Christmas, New Year. Like
Yeah.
I would work. I would actually work. I've come from. I always used to like to work that period because it was quiet when I was working in businesses. You could get stuff done in a different way. But Alia has always tried to leave. She goes and visits her family and leaves the whatever the Monday before Christmas, and doesn't start back till the New Year. So I
Yeah.
work a bit. She goes. So we flex it backwards and forwards. So it's ever changing, but we're constantly talking about that and revisiting it. And we did have a period last year where we weren't having fun, actually. It was because we had taken on too much work and too much travel at the same time. It was
Uh,
August, September. We're still working out like what are the busy periods of the year versus the quieter periods.
Hmm.
And we hadn't had a chance to sit down and properly talk through what's going on and have the conversation of asking, are you having fun? And so stuff, if you don't talk about it, stuff just kind of
Yeah.
goes south quickly.
You didn't become a coach to be a marketer. But if you want to build a sustainable business, you need a system that works for you while you're coaching. Coach Ops is designed to help you go from unpredictable referrals to a reliable marketing system without it feeling pushy or salesy. If you're ready to build something systematic, visit kyber5.com/coach ops. It sounds like a marriage a bit, just because you can very easily get
Mm,
into to your both of your modes of life and doing your work and doing your whatever it is that's going on, and then suddenly you're not talking, and then you're not communicating and aligning, and then you're just like, we're not
yeah,
happy anymore. A couple of things that I was thinking about was, one, like, because you're both working, like, this is a equal co-owned
it's an
organ.
equal partnership. Yeah.
So you both have to be aligned. So you have to force yourselves to answer those questions of what's our service, who are our clients, how are we working. I think a lot of times when I talk with coaches, they don't necessarily have those questions answered for themselves because
Mm,
they're just like, I'll just figure it out as I go along, which, like, to a certain degree is okay, but you should at least make the attempt to understand, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve, and what does that look like for you? And I love how you guys are every quarter revisiting, your initial document, right? To say, is this all still true? Do we need to make changes? And I think that's really fundamental
mm.
to the agile approach, right? Of,
Yes.
iteration.
Yes. We learned it.
Yeah.
We're eating our own medicine, dog
Yeah.
food.
I think that, like, in some ways doing it as a partnership is really good, and because you guys have been in business for about 2.5 years now, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like things are going quite well, actually, where I've talked to a lot of coaches who have started their businesses, and 2 years in, they're still struggling to get new clients.
Yeah.
So something is working well, and I'd love to kind of dive into, like, what do you think has been working well for you guys as a new, 2.5 years is still fairly young. What has been that kind of accelerator for you guys?
There's a few things. One is because there's two of us,
Hmm.
we've got somebody to brainstorm with and bounce ideas off of. And if I'm stuck on something, I can say to Alia, I'm stuck on this, and she's a coach too, so she will ask a question, or she will have an opinion, or she'll have an idea, and we're very willing to jump in and out of what each other needs. So even though we're a partnership, we're often like, my clients are my clients. So if we get a random someone that we don't know asking for coaching, there's often a discussion of like, oh, who wants to be the first person to talk to this client and see if there's a fit. And 9 times out of 10, there is a fit because we've been recommended by word of mouth is generally how we get clients. And so it's not, I mean, we certainly have people that we don't end up landing as a client because there isn't a fit. But so there's a choice there straight away of like, if I speak with someone and they're not sure, I'm like, oh, do you want to speak to Ali? I can straight away refer you to someone who's still going to be earning me money. So that's pretty nice. And we have a bigger network because there's two of us. And so,
Hmm.
one of the benefits, of course, for anyone listening who is thinking about jumping ship from corporate life and becoming a consultant or a coach, with all the layoffs recently, all of a sudden, like, until 2020, my network was in New York, was at Spotify, basically.
Hmm.
And then by 2020, I mean, by now, almost everyone I worked with, that's probably not true, but so many people that I worked with now work somewhere else. And so if they see a problem, or we've got the shared experience of what it was like to be at Spotify, they're like, oh, wouldn't it be good if we had this kind of a conversation between our leadership teams? Or wouldn't it be good if, oh, I need a coach and I know that coach at Spotify was great. Like, that's how we get our business. And so there's a really big network of people out
Hmm.
there. And the other thing I think is we didn't have the financial pressure to earn so quickly. Like, it is hard to build the business. It is often a word of mouth business, and that just takes time. So we didn't we weren't pushing ourselves to be profitable within, I mean, we said 2 years and we managed to do that. Not profit. We were profitable the first year, but we don't have many expenses. We weren't on a timeline from that perspective. And so that let us more easily do things like the metrics we were tracking very early on was how many contacts with people did I make? We still track these metrics. And, we started off trying to do, let's do like 20, and that was way too many. That was not fun and stressful. And I don't know, we tried cold reach out at some points. That
Um,
never got anything. And so we really just had this opportunity to be like, okay, that didn't work. Let's kind of step back and just try again. And we settled it in the end, it's only four. We each make sure we have had four interactions with either new leads or new opportunities, or re-engaging with old people, past clients maybe, and just saying, hey, how you going, and by the way, if you know anyone, I'm still here, that kind of network,
yeah,
the standard, I'm going to say, networking, but that's what we counted early on, so there wasn't pressure from that perspective. We did realize really soon that we needed to get content out there as well, for like content marketing, I guess, but we were thinking more about social proof of like just being seen, which I think
yeah,
people get hung up a lot on in terms of I have to have that, and I think you do have to have that, but that's a much longer play around getting clients. And
yeah,
I look now and I look at all the content we have put out and that we've created for courses that we've run and things we've facilitated, and I'm like, wow, I like we look real now. And I can remember back at the start and even the first 6 months of just going, we don't look real. And I hear people saying it, like just today I was talking with a client who's like, I've got to get my website up. And I was like, I don't think you do have to get your website up. I think you have to just do enough to apply for, he was talking about applying for a job, or like he's trying to pivot, and he's like, I've got to have made it all beautiful that shows why I'm now this. And I'm like, no, you've got to be able to talk to that, and you've got to find the right people to talk to. You don't need the other thing. But it's very intimidating when you're starting out to see all that with other people.
yeah. And so like one is the whole agile approach, like when people start thinking about a lot, especially coaches, they think I need to have a 5-page beautiful website, right? And in truth, like the people who are visiting your website in the first month, there's not going to be that many, so you really don't need that much. But there are just looking to see if you're real and what do you do. And if there are
Mm.
coaches I've met who they don't have websites. They've built their entire
Hmm.
business off of LinkedIn. I
Yeah.
don't suggest doing that, but that just proves the point of you don't need a full website. You just need to start with
Yeah.
I like the agile approach, right? So what I suggest is for most coaches, start with a one-page profile site and just focus on
Yeah.
the content and making sure that who you are, what you do is very clear and that you have clear ways for people, clear call to actions for people to start working with you. And then
And
later
it's
on, you
really,
develop that.
yeah. And then when I said earlier, we had the website because Alia had the time,
Mm,
but the value in that for us actually was the having to put it down. I was going to say on paper, but on a
yeah.
website, and align, have the same message and agree. Yeah, this says what we want it to say. We had a lot of time to do that, but the value was the doing of it, not
Mhm.
the actual website at the end.
Yeah.
And we did make a one pager very early on because we realized we needed to be able to email just a PDF of something
Yeah.
snappier than a whole website of content. I hardly think we used that. And I think, again, that was the activity of us distilling that onto that page
Mhm.
made us more able to talk about it
Yeah.
one to one, or wherever we might be meeting people. So yeah, I think they're useful from getting the habit of being able to succinctly say stuff, but you don't
Yeah.
need them to network and find
Yeah.
clients.
So also like what I'm hearing is even your approach to networking is very systematic, right? You're not saying maybe we'll do some networking this week or we'll try to do kind of like this much, but you guys have set goals for each other and keep each other accountable. We're going to do at least 4 interactions. Is that a week or a month?
It's every 2 weeks. It used to
Yeah.
be every week, and then we changed our planning period, and we didn't change the interactions.
Yeah.
I would say we do, if I average that out, yes, it's like we hit that four total for I guess it's two each a week if we're going to do it by week,
Okay.
for eight total per 2 weeks. And so if I average that out, yes, we hit it. But sometimes there are, this week, for example, I haven't done a lot of outreach yet, and I'll probably do some tomorrow, Friday, and then, but I might not, and then I'll do it all next week. So it's a little bit kind of
Yeah,
fluid like that. But
yeah,
we did have a period, and when we came together for our like planning thing, we do look at like what are the number of leads we have and the
mm,
this, that, and the other. We track them. We don't necessarily target them, but we
yeah,
look at target numbers for them. But we do look and go, oh, look, the leads are down. And
yeah,
we can directly say, oh, that's because we weren't holding each other accountable for doing that networking reach out. So we can see the
yeah,
patterns now. Well, we could see them after maybe 3 quarters of doing that together.
mm,
But 2.5 years, we still don't really know the patterns. Like it's not still a short period of time to know, how many. And some coaches can say, I have to do 10 calls a day in order to convert one, or a week in order to convert one client. Like some of them can quote that. I can't
yeah.
quote that. But the concept of am I tracking it and thinking about it is important.
Yeah, because I recently put out a post, or actually it's a very long article about like for coaches, how do you get new clients? And there's a very system like networking and referrals can very often feel you don't really know when they're coming in. And so your process of trying
Yeah.
to keeping each other accountable and trying to do 2 to 4 every 2 weeks, that is a system that you guys have been put in place that helps to keep it consistent. It's not always
Yeah.
gonna be the same every month, but can on an average, it's pretty consistent, it sounds like, right?
Yes. And on an average, so going back to like the business sounds quite successful, our accountant has said, I don't know, the first time we sat with him was after 6 months, and I think we had 50K or something in the first 6 months, which was good because we'd had some people prepay some stuff that we were going to do the next year. So it was, all a bit, that was nerve wracking actually. We had gotten, I can't remember the numbers, but we had gotten probably half of that money as a commitment for like a series. We do a leadership learning lab series of once a month.
Hmm.
And we had gotten that ahead of time and we hadn't built the thing and we hadn't ever run it before.
I realized I didn't ask you about the name of the company, Frank and Eddie, because you're Fiona and your partner is Aaliyah, and that's not Frank or Eddie. So,
No, so that was right. Because when you look at coaching websites or coaches, their business is their name. And so we had quite a lot of angst about that at the beginning because a lot of the advice was like, you're selling you. And so there was this whole, oh, we're selling us. What is that? And is it our names and is it whatever? And so we spent way too much time on a name. Again, we had a lot of time before we were actually able to start. So it was like slow over those periods. And we wanted something that was meaningful in some way to both of us and that was a bit fun and quirky, kind of.
mm,
Not we didn't want to sound corporate. We didn't, we wanted it to sound like, I don't think we said we wanted to sound like it's two people. That just kind of happened.
mhm,
And we ended up with, I can't exactly remember how we ended up with Frank and Eddie. But the reason that we like it is because Frank is about being very direct and frank and,
mhm,
objective and giving feedback in a straightforward manner. And then the Eddie is this. So Alia and I both love the outdoors, and we both love kayaking actually and canoeing. And so an eddy is within a body of water that's flowing. You get these eddies,
yeah,
and you can pull out if the river might be going really fast, but you can pull out into this eddy and rest and kind of regroup and regather yourself in this like
mhm.
safe part of the river before you kind of jump back into the rush of the water around you. And so we really like that idea of like that's like we are that space. So we get the who's Frank and who's Eddie question kind of regularly, and the answer is we're both Frank and we're both an Eddie.
I'm curious through this process of, kind of getting into this business with your partner, doing this for like 2.5 years, what have you learned about yourself through building this partnership of a coaching company?
I think I've learned a lot about how to really say what I think, which I think sounds odd coming from a coach because I would often be saying to people, have you talked to them about that? But I say it we often, I have caught myself agreeing. We've got lots of examples of where I will agree to something because it sounds like a sensible idea, but it
Mm,
hasn't really been something that will work for me. And or I haven't said I can't do something, or I haven't said I like it's really taught me to be more cognizant of what I can and can't do, and the impact on, for both of us, the impact on the other person if we don't do that. So in a weird way I would say, well, in a way it has taught me to value reliability in a different way than I valued it before, because what I do can affect how Alia feels about the business.
mm,
And so whilst I could make a decision for myself about how I might prioritize my day, might not be how she would do it. And so I've had to learn to be very honest upfront. I'm still learning to be very honest upfront and not kid myself and therefore commit to something more. And then the other thing is, and I really knew this before we started, but it's kind of become more visceral and more true to me, is that I am selling myself and that people will pay for it. Like there was a lot of imposter syndrome I alluded to before when you're starting out and you see all the other stuff that other coaches seem to be doing.
yeah,
And, they've had 3 years or they've had, I don't know, or it's all smoke and mirror, whatever is going on. And everyone says like, you have to, and it's true, you have to make the connection with the client to be able to help them. And they have to have a connection with you because that's the thing that will help you. um,
yeah,
that's the thing that helps most is trusting the other person and being able to
yeah,
share everything to them. And so I knew that I was selling myself, but I didn't really believe that people would buy me, if that makes sense. And so I think that the fact of that happening has made me really confident in a way that I wasn't before.
yeah. I think there's for coaches, you know you've learned and you know the things to say, the questions to ask, and that people are very capable. But at the same time, when we look at ourselves, even though we know the right things, we can't coach ourselves very easily,
No,
right?
no,
And I do think that there are a lot of coaches and people who have imposter syndrome, and it is hard to do a business, right? Because there
yeah,
is that fear, and we have to
yeah.
recognize and reconcile that we do have this. And I recognize that because a lot of coaches, there's actually a lot of dislike for the idea of marketing. Like they don't want to go like near marketing with a 10-foot pole.
Well, because it's a rejection of myself. I've got to put myself out there
Right.
and feel rejected if I don't get much of a result from that marketing.
Right. So there is a lot of fear in that too, but it's also
Yeah,
the flip side is if you don't do any marketing, if you don't talk about the work you do, the lives that you change, right?
yeah,
Then who's gonna know what you're doing and then gonna come to work with you? They can't because they don't know you
yeah.
exist. And so it's something that any business owner needs to get comfortable with is being vulnerable and putting yourself out there. But it's not really like opening up your emotions in your life. You're just kind of saying, hey, I'm doing this thing now. But
But it feels like it because,
yeah,
coach a VP of a company I know nothing about. Like that was mine at the beginning. Like the label of VP would intimidate me a little bit. But the reality is they're just people, and if they've got the same amount of people in an organization, I really know what's going on in there and what to ask about.
yeah.
So
I mean, I think we forget we people and labels on pedestals and we forget these are just people. I just realized because you have been coaching for 2.5 years outside of Spotify. I'm curious because every coach I've talked to, there's always at least one or two. There's at least this one story of a life changed from the coaching that they've done, and I'm curious if you have any stories that
mm.
you would like to share before we wrap up.
So one thing that is true about coaching is the client knows what's in their best interest.
Mm,
And as a coach, I shouldn't have an opinion. And I don't really have an opinion. Like, I don't have skin in the game of what happens to them beyond that they get a satisfying result and want to recommend me further. But at the same time, because the niche that we have, because I am very familiar with, I'm coaching people in tech, in corporations, startups,
Mhm.
ecosystems that I've been in for 20 years that are now changing with AI. So how long will that be true? I don't know. I
Mm.
have, I do have suspicions, I'm going to say, not opinions, but I have suspicions. And so I'm thinking of one particular client that I had. I coached her for two, I coached them for 2 years. I coached them for 2 years and on and off. And at the beginning, they were maybe a senior engineering manager. And by the end, they were a director of engineering.
Mhm.
So, A, that was very satisfying because they were able to make their way up in this organization. At the time when I started coaching them, they were really like, I can't do this. I can't. A lot of imposter syndrome.
Mm.
But I also, through this whole journey with them, could see that actually they should probably leave. They should probably leave.
Mm.
This was not the place for them. It was like pushing a giant boulder up a hill,
Mm.
and they didn't need to be there doing that. And so there was a part of me that was like, and then by the end of our coaching relationship has ended because they left,
Mm.
and they don't need me there anymore. And that is really satisfying. I have always said that the coach's job is to be not needed anymore, and often
Mhm.
that's in very small ways. But I really can see how I was such a support to them throughout those that struggle within that organization, and that they had an entirely different view of themselves by the end. So
Mm.
they if they had have left early on, like they could have entertained leaving, but it would have been because they're not good enough.
Mm.
But actually, that journey that they went on, they were leaving like, oh no, I've done everything I can here, and I've left a lot of legacy, and I've learned a lot, and yeah, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't have to do this. There's no one
Yeah.
saying I should do this anymore. That's always true, as I said, to some small extent with whatever it is you're coaching people on.
Mhm.
I always have a version of people who can't stand their managers, and sometimes that's because the managers are terrible. Sometimes because the communication, they don't know what it means to manage up, or the communication is breaking down, and the manager may or may not be making an effort. But
Yeah.
they can often learn a different way of being and of caring about that, and
Mhm.
managing that in a way that lets them have a really satisfying job, despite what they would describe as shitty leadership. So those are always really satisfying as well.
Before I close, the one of the last questions I like to ask is, what is one piece of advice you'd give to someone just beginning their coaching journey?
It's probably like how you run your business, or what your business ends up looking like isn't going to look like what you think it will at the beginning, or you think it should at the beginning, or what others look like. And so there's something about being brave enough to just start, because those things will come over time. And so, yes, build all the offerings and content and market different things and try all those different things, but you're just trying until you find the thing that sticks. And that's what all those other people have done before you. Or it hasn't stuck, like I said earlier, for them, and it's actually
Yeah.
shadows and mirrors. So, yeah, it's not going to look like what you think it will look like. Or maybe it's you can't predict what it's going to look like, so don't stress about it.
Yeah. I mean, that's very true. I often imagine a future or an outcome that is far from reality. Very often, like,
And yet, the reality is often just as satisfying as you thought that other outcome.
yes,
And so I think the important thing is having something that you think you're going to try to get to, and then being, I don't want to say being content with, but accepting that the point of having that goal is to keep you moving to the next thing,
yeah,
not that that thing you thought is the next thing
yeah.
necessarily.
That outcome is not the end goal. That outcome is just
Yeah,
a marker in the sand for you to work towards, right? And being
yeah,
open to change and, the agile philosophy, iterate and iterate, right? I think that's very important because what we think will work maybe it works, but if it doesn't, then we just pivot and we try something else. And
yeah,
we're building a business, right? So you need to keep moving and seeing what works until you hit on
yeah,
something that resonates.
right. And while you're still, in our case, having fun, doing what we want to do, and still wanting to work with each other, right? And that, I mean, that the possibilities, therefore, for what we do. We joke sometimes that we could like start a secondhand art supplies store, and we would still be hitting those three things, which we find is helpful. Some people would find not helpful because sometimes goals should be narrower than that. But yeah,
No, but I think that is very important. We only have one life, right? If we only have one life, you should be doing the majority of that with having fun and enjoying what you're doing. If you hate what you do, not a great life.
yeah. No, it's, and everyone hates it for a little while, but like you don't
Yeah.
want to slog, because I do want to acknowledge that people are, society and expectations are very much, it feels like it's very much, you choose the career, you start that career, you like, that's what we learn. That's what a lot of corporate, definitely corporate capitalistic side of the world drives us to.
Hmm.
And we can get in our own little bubbles and not see the possibilities outside of that, and have real financial obligations that create constraints on what we feel like we can do. You're creating those yourself, and so you can change them as well
Yeah.
within reason.
Yeah. Fiona, I thank you so much for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed this conversation. If anyone wanted to get connected with you, how can they do that?
They can find me on LinkedIn. That's always a good way. And our website is frankandeddie.com, and there's a contact form there.
Okay, perfect. And we'll include links to those in the show descriptions as well. And Fiona, thank you so much again. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.
Want to stop guessing and start building a marketing system that actually fills your calendar? Head to kyber5.com/coachops and let's get systematic. That's it for today's episode. I hope you grabbed something useful you can actually apply in your business. If you did, leave a comment or share it with a friend. And hit subscribe if you haven't already. I'll catch you next week.